Professor Sir John Curtice joins me, polling expert and Professor of Politics at the University of Strathclyde. John, very good to see you. I said to Anne Widdecombe, this is going to electrify the election, but can we really make any predictions as to what difference it might make on polling day?
Well, we certainly can't make any firm predictions. There's 4 weeks to go. What do we know? We know two things. One is that hypothetical polling, and hypothetical polling should always be regarded carefully, but hypothetical polling, which has asked people, would you vote for reform if Mr. Farage were leader, has suggested that even with reform now running on average at about 11%, that Mr. Farage's presence might add another 2 or 3 points. So certainly associating with Mr. Farage with reform is at least positive in the eyes of some voters. The other thing we know, of course, is that he is a highly charismatic politician who is now going to land in the middle of an election campaign where charisma is rather in short supply. Now, I think what I think perhaps is most likely, one of the most important things that hasn't happened in this campaign so far is that support for reform has not gone down since Mr. Sunak called the election. And for the Conservatives, getting the reform vote down is crucial because it's very clear, despite what Anne Widdecombe said, that the vast majority of people who have switched to reform voted Conservative in 2019. Maybe some of them would have voted Labour if reform were not on the ballot paper. But actually, the evidence of the local elections was very, very clear. Where reform were on the ballot paper in the local elections, it was the Conservatives who suffered. So that already means that Mr. Farage is going into something which seems to be a steady ship. Now, if all he does is simply to ensure that support for reform is not squeezed in the next 4 weeks, that in itself will be bad news for the Conservatives. Not least because what we have to remember here, this is in a sense, for those of us who remember the election 5 years ago, this has a remarkable sense of reverse deja vu. 5 years ago, Nigel Farage announced he was pulling his Brexit Party candidates out of Conservative-held seats. And in the wake of that, support for the Brexit Party fell quite markedly, even in places where it was standing. Now he's doing the very opposite. And the problem for the Conservatives is that whatever share of the vote they get, that vote is above all going to rise most in Conservative-held seats, simply because the baseline is zero, because there wasn't a Brexit Party candidate there last time. And we can see the key message of YouGov's MRP polling. It was there in the local elections. It was there in previous MRP polling. It was there in last year's local elections. The Conservatives are losing support more heavily in places where they were previously strongest. And one of the reasons for that is indeed the fact that reform support, the rise in reform support, as compared with Brexit in 2019, is highest in Conservative-held seats.
And what about his ambition to attract people who don't normally vote to vote in this election? Because that was a tactic that Vote Leave used in the Brexit referendum very successfully. I think there were a lot of academic studies show that 2.5–3 million people voted in that referendum that had never, ever voted before. Could he pull that off here?
Well, I have to say that has a slight reminder of the kind of arguments that the Corbynites used to use back in 2017 and 2019 with mixed results. The honest truth is Mr. Farage actually has a ready market amongst people who voted in 2019. The crucial problem the Conservatives face is that they have lost more than half of the people who backed Leave, not only in 2016, but in 2019, and who voted for Boris Johnson, but are now not minded to vote for the party. And a lot of that support is literally going to reform. And I think the question is, Mr. Farage doesn't simply need to try to attract people who didn't vote, who, frankly, are probably less likely to be inclined to his message than just trying to erode yet further those people who are unhappy with the Conservatives, still believe in Brexit, concerned about immigration, and who perhaps with Mr. Farage at the helm may now regard voting for reform as a more attractive prospect.
And just finally, the question which everyone wants to know the answer to, can he win Clacton?
Well, I think that's the less important question, although, of course, if he wants to be leader for the next 5 years, he would find it useful to have a parliamentary berth. Not easy. Yes, Douglas Carswell won it. Yes, it's 72% Brexit vote back in 2016, one of the most pro-Brexit constituencies in the country. But it was also even back in 2019, it was a 70% Conservative vote. Even in current circumstances, the Conservatives could still normally at least get 50% of the vote. Overhauling that is going to be perhaps an even bigger challenge than some of the other challenges that Mr. Farage has taken on in his now quite lengthy and checkered career.
John, thank you very much indeed. That's Professor Sir John Curtice there, talking about Nigel Farage's return to frontline politics as leader of Reform UK and candidate in Clacton.